Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Sid, for inviting me to address you today. If you thought you were going to learn about making beer, you made a big mistake, because I'm not a brewer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little story and give you some philosophies on what we believe are important factors of doing business in Australia. But first off, I have to take you back a little bit. I want to explain to you a little bit of what happened in the past, because it will relate to something I'm going to talk about a little later during my presentation, and that was how we defended a hostile takeover bid from the giant Kirin Brewery a few years ago. As you saw, Thomas started this brewery, and I have to tell you one thing. My great-great-grandfather had 2 wives, 19 children, and that stuffed it right from the start. Today we find ourselves as the only Australian major brewery left in this country, which to a certain degree is quite sad, and I say that seriously, because when Foster's was sold, we lost a world icon of beer in this country. But we've got that mantle, so we wear it proudly. So Thomas started this little brewery in 1862 in the back blocks of South Australia. Wasn't very far from the city, but in those days it was sort of in the country. And his closest neighbour was one Dr. Penfold putting in a winery just up the road. And they used to get together, and Dr. Penfold would bring the wine and Thomas would bring the beer, and they'd get together and have a drink together. And that's how it started around in little old Adelaide. From this old brewery to this brand new greenfield site brewery. The old brewery was in a very unique suburb which upmarket houses grew around. Very upmarket houses, quite expensive houses. And you had a brewery plumb in the middle. So it became obvious later, towards the end of 97, 98, that we were going to be crowded in and couldn't expand. So we moved to this brand new site. So it was a big investment by the company, a $45 million investment by the family to make this change. Today we have a very modern, upmarket, environmentally friendly brewery, which has allowed us to expand substantially. We have a lot of lawn. In fact, we had a lot of grass around there. We actually have a 3-hole golf course, just in case the Coopers want to go and play a little round of golf. But it's a fabulous site, and it's been very beneficial for us. How beneficial? I'm going to take you back a little bit. First off, I'm going to show you this slide because it becomes very important of something which is very unique in this country and is very important to private family businesses, private as well as family businesses. With those 16, 18, 19 odd children, it was pretty difficult right at the start. And what happened, the sons of Thomas, the stepbrothers, established that there would be a problem very early in the piece. So what they did, they created a structure about 1909 that is on our boardroom table today. And it's quite a unique structure. They created 3,000 A shares. They created 3,000 B shares. The A shares can have 2 seats on our board, and the B shares have 2 seats on our board. The A shares are only ever to be allowed to held by descendants of Thomas Cooper's first wife. So for example, I'm a fifth generation Cooper from Thomas's first wife. My cousin, our managing director, Tim Cooper, he is a 5th generation descendant from the second wife. So people say, "You're brothers, I met your brother." No, we're actually second half cousins 3 times removed. But we have a culture. Now what that did, that structure with the 2 seats, the 2 seats, I sit here with another Cooper, Dr. James Cooper. By the way, I got a Dr. Tim Cooper, I got Dr. James Cooper. So the good Cooper doctors tell you the beer's okay, all right? So you can believe that. But what happens, I sit there representing one of those seats. Dr. James Cooper represents the other, non-executive director. Tim Cooper and his sister Melanie, they represent the B2B seats. And we have a slightly independent seat overheld by a son-in-law. What that means though, is that these balance of power on the boardroom table cannot change. It has to be held by the descendants of the first wife and descendants of the second wife. They also created about a million C shares. Now this is a tradable share within the family. Doesn't carry any board position, but carries the same value of dividend. So about a million C shares. Now, I have to tell you today that unfortunately you can't buy Cooper shares. We are a public unlisted company. We have to be a public company because we have more than 50 shareholders. But we're unlisted, so you can't buy them. The only way you can buy Cooper shares is you've got to marry a Cooper. I was talking a few months ago and a little old lady down the front put her hand up and said, I'm ready. So if you marry a Cooper, you can buy some shares. You can buy those C shares. You can't buy the A's and B's, but you can buy some C shares. And let's say that marriage ends up in divorce and you separate. You can take those shares with you, but you cannot sell them outside. They come with an issue called preemptive rights, which means they must be sold back into an existing Cooper shareholder or back into the company. This was tested enormously by Lion Nathan in their hostile takeover bid of Coopers, which I'm going to cover a little later. It's a very important point. It was tested in the federal courts of Australia, and we were successful at holding that preemptive right structure in place. So having said that structure, that's what runs our company today. Now, for example, when my father, Ken Cooper, said I'm stepping off the board, he can nominate me, but he can't put me in. The A shareholders have to vote. And as they vote, other A shareholders can stand against me. The Bs cannot vote. They can verbalise that they don't like me or like me, but they cannot vote. So what happens, it's a change of this seat. Fortunately, I got enough of the A shareholders who said, yes, Glenn's got enough background, he can come in. That's what will happen on this side. So the balance is retained over all those generations and cannot change. It's a very powerful tool, and it would work well in some other private companies today that had conflict. So I'm going to move on to how we performed. Now, I have to tell you that Tim and I, being the 5th generation Coopers, we joined about here in 1990. So you can see we had an immediate impact on the whole operation. Right? And it was about this point here in 93 that the 4th generation Coopers, Max and Bill Cooper, said, look, you boys stay there, we'll call you when we need you. But things did start to change, and Tim and I started to get involved in the company, and it started to grow. And the red area there was when we got that brand new brewery going properly, and it was completely opened and operated. And so you can see the story's been very good ever since, and it's still going in that direction. So we're pretty proud of how that big change, that big investment by the family took place. But I'm going to try to get back now to show you competitively where we sit. Now there we are, that's our competitors today. That's the big giant Kieran and Miller breweries, and all imported beer. So that's what we compete with. Well, we have 5%. We've actually got about 5.2% of the total beer market. And some of you might say, oh, I thought Coopers was bigger than that. Well, if we take away maybe the 4X and the VBs and the 2Es and look at the sort of more higher level, we've probably got about 16, 17% of that market. So in our playing area, we feel pretty comfortable. But that's our opposition. Now, an example here was when Foster's was sold, they trimmed $10 million off their marketing budget. That's trimming off their budget. We don't even have much to spend on a pure marketing budget. So my answer, how do you compete in a world of that? And it's not just beer, it's not just wine, it's any industry in Australia. How can you compete against great big companies? And we're seeing more and more of that in this country. Well, you can compete. I'm going to take it back a little bit, take it back in time and work how we decided to compete against those giant breweries. What I did was I established something called the Coopers Advantage. And this isn't just Coopers, but I identified the things that we have that the others don't. What have we got that the others don't? You know, people might say beer's beer, and it is to a certain degree. But what do we have that the others don't have? And I identified a number of things. The company position ownership. Well, we are different. We've got Coopers. We've got a culture in our family. Many companies, large corporations say we've been older than Coopers or as old as Coopers, but they're large corporations and their CEO have changed many times. And when a new CEO comes in, they feel they got a God-given gift to change things. So the culture gets fragmented substantially. In a family company, there's a culture, or a private company, a culture that goes on. Yes, it changes with time, but it basically stays, and there's a culture that goes on and lives on a little longer. Company history, 153 years. Yes, that culture's gone on for a while. We're a product range, natural beers. For years when I joined the brewery, Foster's people used to say to me, Coopers don't even know how to filter beer. And by the way, the Coopers beer comes out of the dirty River Murray because it's cloudy. Today, cloudy means that it's a natural process. And our beers are known. The rolling of the bottle of the Coopers Theatre, where people take automatically now throughout Australia will take the beer out and roll it to mix the sediment up. This is the changes that have occurred. It is different. Wouldn't work, it'd look a bit odd rolling a 4X, particularly up in Queensland because they take the top off first. But so, the difference is we have a product difference. You know, we have also a close product association. What do I mean by that? Well, let me give you an example. We have pure blonde, fat blonde, platinum blonde, big blonde, little blondes. We have tons of blonde beers. We have tons of different name beers. The big guys can throw a lot of products at the market. If they don't work, or some of them don't work, they just pull it off the market. It doesn't matter too much. They just bring out another one. All of Cooper's products are Cooper's Pale Ale, Cooper's Sparkling, Cooper's Stout. We all have that family name with every single product. So if we deliver a dud beer, well, the problem we've got is it's going to affect all of our other reputation. So for us, it's pretty hard to throw a whole bunch of beers at the market and see what happens, because it will affect our name. On the reverse side of that, when we do bring out a new beer, at least we get a head start, because people say, well, if Cooper's is pretty good, I'll taste it, it's got to be good. So that's what I mean by our close product association. The other thing I identified, the difference with Cooper's, you can still meet a Cooper. After today, you may say big deal. But you know, we have that point, and we still work with that. There was an advertising campaign that says, who is James Bogues? We say, who cares? But there's not real, but we are real. So the Coopers, and we, both Tim, myself, Cooper, we take a lot of pride and we go out and we meet people. We become part of this organisation, we become part of the wholesaling in Australia. They're the advantages that I identified very early years ago. Now, how do you take those advantages and put them into a market with a limited budget where there's a giant advertising spend by your competitors? So you take them in carefully, and you don't, as I go through a couple of these old ads, you will see that they all relate to those advantages which the others don't have. And let me give you an example here. Now, any accountants in the room? Come on, put your hand up. No accountants? Surely. Well, I always say to the accountants, just remember, you have nothing to count until something is sold. So we did this ad. What was something? Breweries should never be run by accountants. Brewers should be run by brewers. I framed it up and put it at our accountant's office, just so he knows he was working in a brewery. So, but what's the difference with this? Well, the gentleman in the picture, it's not a talent, it's not a photographer, was our Maxwell Cooper, chairman at the time, one of the Coopers. The difference is, we use one of the Coopers. That close association with a Cooper, we put into the structure. The words underneath said handmade by the Cooper family, an old structure, remembering that those things are the elements that the others don't have. So that's what we wanted to do. Now, this was a very old ad we ran, and there's a great story behind this, because soon after I released a product called Dark Ale, Cooper's Dark Ale. And our advertising agency came out with a poster which they felt would be a good ad. And this is what they came out with. Meet the dark side of the family. And I thought, well, that's terrific. You've taken the chairman of the company, you've put him in dark glasses, and you've called him the dark side of the family. So I like the idea and the connection, but this is going to be a little hard to sell. But in those days, my little office was up the old brewery near the boardroom, and the boardroom was the bar, and the bar was frequently used. And I heard Maxwell and Bill come in one day after a long lunch on a Friday, and heard them laughing, and I said, well, here's a good chance. So I took that poster in, and I said, oh, look, Mr. Max, what do you think of this? Is it a good ad? It'll only ever go in magazines, just a few ads. And he loved it. He said, yeah, that's funny. They laughed. It was a great idea. I said, look, it'll only be in a few magazines. Well, Maxwell went off to Singapore, and what happened was that our advertising agency came to us and said, we've got an opportunity to put an ad on the back of 280 buses around Adelaide. They're going to whack the old dark side on the back of the bus. So we put Maxwell Cooper on the back of the bus. Only problem is I hadn't told him. When he came back from Singapore in the cab, he's coming out from the airport, there it was. He's on the back of every bus as the dark side of the family going around Adelaide. If he was here today and what he did, he pulled those sunglasses out and put them on. That's the difference. And so Maxwell became the dark side of the family. That's the difference that we can operate in compared to the big breweries. That wouldn't quite work with the CEO of Foster's or now really SAB Miller. So we utilised this. And what else did we do? Well, we did something that we thought was completely different. Now we have a magazine that was started in South Australia called Wine State. It's quite a substantial magazine. It was all about wine. It was its first edition. I rang the guy up and I said, I want to take a page ad out with Coopers beer ad in the first wine magazine. And they said, Glenn, you're an idiot. What are you going to do it for? Well, we produced an ad. All the winemakers say, and still do today, that Coopers is the winemaker's beer. They all told me it was the winemaker's beer. They all loved our beer. When they finished their harvesting, when they finished their cropping, when they finished their tasting, they drank sparkling ale. They liked the flavour. I said to these wine people, would you write something down? I want to do an ad in the wine magazine. Would you write down in your own words what you think of our beer? And the first one at the top there is from Robert Hill Smith, who said, from Yalumba, saying, I always said it was the winemaker's beer. And one or two of the others. This is from Robert O'Callaghan, Rockford, famous basket press, famous product. He says, my crusher is driven by a 1916 petrol engine built by the Kaiser family. My staff are fueled by sparkling ales brewed by the Cooper family. And another one that came in wrote in, and this is their handwriting unchanged, was James Halliday, world-renowned media writer for wine. Not only Australia's best beer, but one of the world's best. This is powerful stuff. If somebody writes a good letter about you and writes to you personally, takes the time to do it, don't stick it in the bottom drawer. Put it up in your businesses. If somebody's good enough to do that, stick it up there. I'll bet you if you have a reception or a premise there, people will walk in and they'll stand over in the corner reading something special about you before they go and read a magazine. So don't throw it away if people are prepared to do it. As I said, we didn't change any of these, except we did change this last one. This was from Peter Lehman, recently passed away from Lehman Wines. Keep your cotton picking hands off my Coopers. We did change that one because if you met Peter Lehman, he always used expletives and swore like mad. And he put the swear words in there, so we had to take them out just before they put the ad in. We ran this ad in the first magazine of Wine State. I got tons of phone calls from all the winemakers. Why didn't you ask me? We ended up doing 5 posters, 2 in New Zealand, all the winemakers. That's the difference that we have to operate on compared to the 4Xs or the Fosters, etc., or the VBs. We have to operate in those connections I introduced you to, going back in the things. In business, in your business, be it liquor stores, be it wherever, there are advantages. You have to find them, and then you have to relate to them, and then you have to present them to your consumer in a way. But they are there, and they may, if you're a small store competing with a Coles Woolworths, you will have advantages. You just have to identify them. I'm going to run through you something here that's a very important part of our history and life. And that was when the giant brewery, which is Lion Nathan, owned by Kieran, launched a takeover bid for Coopers. Now, how can they do that when I told you they structured the shares? Well, let me paint the picture for you. Our share price at the time for our dividends was $48 a share. But because we are an unlisted public company, being public in Australia, we have to put all our results and all of our shareholder listing into ASIC like a normal public company. So it's accessible. So our share price is $48 a share. So what Lion did is they went to our shareholders and said, if you sign power of attorney, if those shares are over to us, we'll give you $260 a share. And the money does not have to come back, whatever happens. So that is a very good offer. As chairman of the company, that is a very difficult position for me. I'm legally not allowed to say that is not, don't sell. I'm not allowed to say to our shareholders, who are now some 130 odd shareholders, don't sell. Because I'm not allowed to do that, because that's a good offer. $48 to $260. Wow, that's fabulous. But I can't say that. What I have to say to the people is that that as Coopers, personally, I'm not going to sell. However, that's a good offer. So they then ask people to sign these power of attorney. The idea being, if they get enough power of attorney over shares, they can come to the board, come to our extraordinary general meetings and force issues and force us to sell. That was the plan. So what we did, we put a scheme into place. We put a package. We said that is a very good offer. What we'll do is don't sell them to Lion Nathan, don't sign that piece of paper. Sell them to us. We'll take them back in at $260 a share and we'll cancel them. That way that everybody stays in the company, it stays in, your asset value will grow. But we understand it may be a chance for younger generations to buy houses, reduce debt. So we matched their offer. And that was a pretty good deal. Just don't sign that power of attorney for them. sell them to us and we'll cancel them. Pretty good deal until Lion Nathan lifted their offer to $310, a $50 increase in one go. Now this is getting really serious. At this point in time, I have to turn around and say, this is a great offer, but we don't want you to sell. I'm not allowed to say that. So what do? We can't go chasing. We've done deals at $260 a share. What do? Well, our advisors came up, and our advisors at the time was a whole host of lawyers. Any of your lawyers in the room? Any solicitors? Gee, we've got a good group today, thank goodness. But I have to tell you one thing I usually say to the lawyers, I say, did you get your cut? Because every lawyer in Australia must have. It cost us $8.5 million to defend this company. And we got back about 800,000. So it was a big issue for the family, but we were committed. So what do? Well, we said straight away, only way we can stop this is we want to insert a clause into our articles. And that clause says, no other brewery may own shares in Coopers. Now to do that, you need 75% of your shareholders to vote on that clause going in. But what you're asking your shareholders to do is to vote that no other brewery can ever buy shares in Coopers, which means you're blocking a premium offer in the future. And what the real kicker is this, is that we said we'd leave the $260 open for 1 year, but after that time we would have to take it away, and a company would be revalued with that clause in, which would highly likely reduce the price, the value of your share. So you're asking your shareholders to vote on something to insert into block other breweries, which would highly likely lower our share price under $260. So that's a pretty big ask. Now we need 75% of the vote. So we eventually wanted to have this meeting, the extraordinary general meeting, to ask our shareholders. Lion took us to court 7 times. We won 7 times. We got to have this extraordinary general meeting on December 2005. I'll paint the picture for you. At the brewery, we've got an entertainment area. We've got media throughout Australia there. We gave them an esky full of beer on ice, put it 100 metres away over under a tree and said, don't come any further. You're not allowed to. In our room, we have about 200 people. We've got shareholders at Coopers from 10 years old to 94 years old. We've got Coopers directors. We've got Kieran, Lion Nathan directors. We've got our lawyers. We've got their lawyers because they have some power of attorney shares that I've already paid the money for. So they're allowed in that meeting. So that's a fun meeting. And I'm chairing the meeting, and I had to explain to our shareholders that to vote yes to insert this clause, that it will highly likely after 1 more year when we take away the 260, the value of our share will go down. But we want you to have faith in this company for the future. And our lawyers said to me, you won't make one mistake, Glenn, today, they will stand up and be back in court straight away. So we got through it, and I explained to people very clearly what the result would possibly be of saying yes to inserting this clause. I adjourned the meeting, and we had an independent group take the vote. The lady came up, she tapped me on the shoulder, gave me a little piece of paper, about that big, folded over. That was the result. I had to look at it beforehand, so I did the best poker face in the world because people were looking at me. I opened it up, nothing. I then reconvened the meeting. 93.4% of our shareholders said insert the clause. We don't care. We want to save this brewery. Lion Nathan 6.6, that was the stuff that they'd got after offering $310 a share. Next day, Lion placed those shares back in our power of attorney, back into our share buyback at $260, and we cancelled them. Coopers shareholders focused on loyalty and at tradition, and Coopers was saved. Today, our share price with that clause inserted is $348 a share. Thank you. So it was an exciting time, but I've got to tell you something. I'm going to call this thing the last punch. During this very difficult process, I learned a very difficult lesson. The big companies do have control of the press. They have total control of the press. And in the last few weeks, the stuff coming out of Sydney was not very fair to Coopers. So we shut our press down. But they had control. Once it gets out in that network, that's it. They'll all print it. But something happened in Adelaide which was fabulous. Lion Nathan, or Kieran's brewery down at West End Brewery, is on the riverbank, River Torrens. They have a Christmas display, and every year they put up a lovely Christmas display. In that Christmas flavour, there was a big polythene whale, huge big whale. And we had a flood during this takeover, and the whale broke loose and their whale took off down the river. There was photographs and TV cameras on it, the whole bit. I rang up our advertising agent, I said, buy the photograph of their whale nicking off down the river. I want to own that photograph. Buy it, I don't care. And we bought it. I'm not telling you what it cost, but it cost a bit. So we bought the damn thing of their whale nicking off down the river. And then our advertising agency came up with 2 ads. They showed me the ads, I held them up. And the lawyers said to me, well, if you do that ad, you'll be all right. If you do that ad, you'll be paying us more money. Okay, so we went with that ad. And we put a full-page ad around Australia with our name on it. And this was the ad, the freedom to go your own way. We can relate to that. And we put Coopers underneath it. There's their whale nicking off, but we wanted to be free. We did not want this incumbent. Now, the other ad somehow escaped on the internet. I don't know how it happened. I'm trying to find out how it occurred. I spoke to advertising, how could you let this happen? But it escaped, right? And it became one of the first viral emails that went around Australia and overseas. And I'll show you the ad. Hope it doesn't offend, but I'll show you. This is the ad. If you were a whale, you wouldn't hang around a Japanese-owned brewery either. So, you just have to have one shot, right? And that was it, all right? I'm going to conclude up with this with just some of the values that I put on business. And it's any business, it's not always. But it's not necessarily family business, it can be private, small, but typically small business. Never forget your company culture and its values. The image of your company is your advantage, and that's completely under your control. Now, when you go into a shop in your service and you get bad business, you get bad service, really arrogant, poor service, well, don't always blame the person in front of you, because have a look up. Have a look up at the management, have a look a little higher, because remember, the fish stinks from the head first. And you'll find it's a culture thing coming down. You'll probably find that the boss or the manager, he's arrogant and he's not too good. And it filters down, because our staff mimic us. They mimic us enormously. If you're a manager and got staff under you, you actually have a lot of power. You probably don't realise how much power you have. But it's a culture that we have in our company, and it's a culture that builds, and it's a culture that's a powerful tool if it's a strong, good culture. So another thing here, for family or private businesses, be a custodian. If the intentions for the business are for it to remain family owned or privately owned, then respect the work of past generations, show humility, and understand that despite your shareholding, you are the steward of something far bigger than you. Change but stay the same. Move with and adopt an ever-changing business environment to remain relevant. But hold on to core values and beliefs that the family's involvement have shaped. I think they're very good words, but I didn't write them. My son wrote them 2 days after the Lion Nathan takeover. So I feel we've got a good culture going on in our company. My son, by the way, with children in our business, you can't even come near the business till 30 years old. I joined when I was 39. My son, he's working with Diageo in Singapore. He's 32. I say, go and stuff up somebody else's business first. But that's how we work. We push the people out to learn and then come back in as better people. Just in conclusion, you heard I did the Kokoda Trail. It was something pretty special. My uncle, Colonel Cooper, I didn't know about him until after he'd sort of passed away. He was a chairman at one stage. He talked to me a little bit about what was going on, but very little. But I found out he was a hero. I went and did the Kokoda Trail. It was something very special. For those of you that want to do something, if you've got a group of people, most of you are young enough. I did it only about 6 years ago. I was the oldest in our group. Still got through all right. If you want to do something special, you want to learn and get some great mental involvement and learn a little about the history of Australia, go and do the Kokoda Trail. Get yourself very fit though first. It's worth planning for it 6 months beforehand. When you do the Kokoda Trail, at the end, they take you to the Bermuda Cemetery. And you see the graves of the people you've read about. You read the books, you read the history. For those of you unaware, Australia, the Kokoda was the first inflicted defeat for the Japanese on land. They'd been defeated on the air-sea battle over Midway, but Australia with its limited troops were the first one to inflict a defeat at Kokoda. But you look at the graves and you see all the names that you've read about. And over to my right was another set of graves. And you know what, I went over to have a look at these graves. And you know what, in business today, we think we have a bad day. We get pissed off, we get annoyed, we go to work and say, I'm annoyed, I've had a bad weekend, I'm going to take it out. And as I said with the culture, that will filter down to your staff. You have a bad day, guess what, your staff start having a bad day. It's about you and your culture. And I went over to these graves and I had a look, and this was written on the grave. It said, a soldier of the 1939-45 war. They don't know where he was, who his name was, where he came from, or what he did. That's when you're having a bad day. I thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Very powerful and insightful presentation. So Glenn's going to take some Q&A now. So I've got a roaming mic. I'm just going to run around, and if anyone got any questions, now's the time. We'll have about 10 minutes question time. Sir.
Glenn, that was a great presentation. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it immensely. Thank you very much. But I was just wondering, do you have something against the Japanese? You just had another dig at them there now.
No, not at all, no. The opportunity presented itself with Kirin Brewery and we just had to take a little shot. But no, I don't, no. In fact, I can put a real good rest to that because we brew in Australia, we brew Sapporo beer and have a great relationship. So the Sapporo you drink in Australia comes out of Coopers Brewery. So, yeah, thank you.
That's a good point, actually, Glenn. Yeah. Any more questions, please?
That's good. Easy.
Yes.
I was just curious to know what your thoughts were about the changing taste of consumers with regards to beer, craft beer, and the proliferation of craft brewers in the country.
Yeah, it's a really interesting position now for us because effectively, you know, there's a few places around town now say, oh, but Coopers, you're too big to be craft now. And, you know, that's a little bit of an issue for us. But we see ourselves as the grandfather of craft. I mean, we were doing craft back in 1862. But generally the craft beer is quite good to us. We are quite comfortable with it because while they are competitors, and I think better competitors than maybe VB or 4X, but the pie has grown. Yes, the competitors are there now, but the pie has grown bigger. And the great thing for us that I've seen with craft is it makes people think a bit more about the style of beers they want to drink. They're a bit more educated, a lot more educated. And I don't want to have a go at 4X and VB, you might as well though. But you know, a lot of those people moving around are thinking about what beers they want. And they'll move around within a good group. And that's good for us too. They're not locked into the one brand. I mean, my father and probably your father, etc., you would sit in a bar, and not so much my father, but another, they'd sit there, one would drink the 4X, one would drink the VB or the 2Es, and they'd argue, and neither would try the other one. Today, that is totally different with this young generation. They're much more experimental, and that's good for our business.
Okay, cheers, Glenn. We've got another question just over here from Sid.
Hi, Glenn. Thank you very much for everything. I have one question, I guess, on behalf of all the suppliers. If you had 20 minutes in front of a retailer, what would be your pitch? How would you present your introduction to a new retailer, your new brand?
Okay, well, we'll talk about the define of a smaller retailer.
Yep.
Yeah, not the big. You know, again, I come back to those things that we had to do. Have a look within your business what you can do that the others can't. And one of the things I do see with many of the retail stores, the smaller ones, you know, they're very located to an area, and they should work that area over. They're the face. The other big ones do not have a face. You've got a face and a personality. You put a face and a personality into your business, and you can step forward. And word will spread, and they'll get a little wider. You know, you've got other advantages. I mean, being a little store and not being there, I'm afraid you're going to struggle with that. If you want to be a good retailer, you've got to be there. You've got to develop a process, a culture, and build it around that area. And you will find if you come up market and build that culture, you will be able to survive. It's when you try and go with the others and look at every paper, look what the Coles and Woolworths are selling at, and then you say, oh my God, they've got it at $40, I've got to match that. That's when you get stuck into a whirlpool downwards because you're never going to be able to beat them. But you have a great advantage, and that is your culture, your personality, and where you are as a location.
Thanks, Glenn. Actually, maybe I wasn't clear. How would a small brewery, winery, or a distillery pitch to a small retailer? You know, how would you introduce yourself if
Well,
you were an unknown brand?
Well, let's take a small craft brewery, because that's more relevant to our... The way you have to pitch that is, again, that we are going to be produced with unique, different beers very quickly. Because the great advantage for small breweries is they can change brews really quickly. They can offer... I would go into them and say, in your area, if you know your area, what are the style of drinkers that you have? What style of beer would you think they like? What do they buy now? And make something similar to that style. And then alter it as time needs to be altered, change needs to occur. I would try and make that very personable, right? And very much so, if you're a craft brewer, you should have time to go out and be that face, like the Cooper or so, and be that face at that place and build that profile. Again, if you want to go up against, a bit like us, you go up against us, you're going to need a lot of capital, you're going to need a white knight. You're going to need a white knight with a lot of money, because breweries, unfortunately, as you start them, you can't grow them like that. You've got to grow them like that, and they're big jumps, and the financial world today is not going to back you to a lot of millions of dollars with a small little brewery.
Thank you. Yes, sir, in the front here.
G'day. Quick question for you. In, say, a craft beer market, what would you recommend to go with, the 330ml or the 500ml bottles if you're looking at changing your range?
Yeah, okay. Well, this is a really good, this is the three, we have got for our ales 375. We've got our other beers, our sort of Cooper's Celebration Ale, and those are trendier, more crafted type beers we call crafted. They're at 355. We don't have any product at 330. For a craft beer, I typically would say stick at 355. I have a little problem where, and we're already seeing some consumers, when you start going to 330, the consumer tends to notice that there's a lot less product in there. 375 to 355, not so much of a different. A lot of the European beers we have like our Sapporo, our Carlsberg, are all in 355ml. It's only a bit of a theory, but gee, that 330ml bottle feels a bit smaller than the 355, so I'd say go right in the middle, 355.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess 355's 12 ounces too, and 330's 11 ounces and stuff like that. One last question. If anyone would like the last question for Glenn? Is there one over there? And I'll just go. I saw you first, sir. That's all right.
G'day, Glenn. As you said, with your marketing, you wanted to be like focused in Adelaide. Do you spend most of your marketing in Adelaide and then Australia and then the world, or do you do sort of a bit of everything?
No. We when I joined the brewery back in 1990, we had about nearly 85-90% of our product was sold in South Australia. Today, 23% sold in South Australia. We deliberately wanted to push, and I deliberately pushed out of South Australia because, one, that you can easily be taken over if you're doing business in one area of a larger brewery. So we spread out around Australia. Plus, economics will tell you that you've got to get into Sydney. You've got into those big cities. Sydney's a great city for beers because they're so cosmopolitan. Melbourne's there getting that way too. They'll accept different brands, and we don't push the South Australian element whatsoever. That's why we do handmade, but the Coopers Australian made, Australian owned. We go that way. Today, I don't think, other than the small areas of really small breweries, but if you're a large scale operator to a certain degree, you've got to go the whole of Australia. And we're pushing in now, part of my little role in my so-called retirement is into Asia, because Asia's changing enormously. Asia was dominated by Tiger and, and Carlsberg and Heineken. We're seeing great changes. You go to Vietnam now, they've got substantial sized beer halls, and you walk in there and the menu they give you shows beers from Germany, Belgium, Australia, and they're starting to spread their words. That crafted type area is occurring in Asia, and we see that as a very good position for Coopers. I follow that Belgium type style because their beers are similar to us. So you've got to be a world type economy if you can.